to episode number 94, Mastering Modern Selling. I'm Tom Burton here with, 3 weeks in a row now? Both Carson and Brandon. Man, I'm feeling spoiled.
Okay,
Tom's gonna start, wanting to go live without us, Carson.
I'll be on vacation at the end of July, beginning of August. So
I'm moving next week, so I won't be here next week. So you're going to have to handle it without me. But anyway, welcome, and Keith Rosen, welcome.
Oh, thank you.
So we were having a little problems connecting today, but I think we're getting there. So hopefully you can hear us. And there is Bob. Bob's here. That's our
we know we're successful if we've already got Bob.
That's right. And he's early, right on time. So we know this is important. All right. Well, Keith, welcome. We're going to talk a bit today about a topic that we've talked about actually quite a bit over the last few months, which is sales leadership. It wasn't a topic. I don't think we really talked a lot about it until Mike Weinberg was on a couple of months ago. And I think really raised our awareness of some of the things related to sales leadership. So Keith, I know this is your area, and, start us off by telling a little about your background and what you do. And then I know we've got some great topics we're going to get into.
Absolutely. So I'll laser this quickly. 32 years ago, I opened up my practice and heavily focused on sales teams. And the more I was helping develop the sales teams and having them become better coaches, the more I realized that the bigger gap was the managers, that they don't know how to coach. And working with organizations globally over the past 32 years, the one common question I would ask is, do you have a common methodology of coaching? Do you have a framework and a universal definition? And the answer inevitably is always no. So I have then shifted to focus heavily on leaders globally, regardless of company culture, regardless of geographic location. We're dealing with people and human beings. So I have found that spending most of my time now working with leaders and having the privilege of working with over hundreds of thousands over 75 countries and 6 continents. So thanks again. Happy to be here. And I'm sure we'll dive into a couple of points in my books as well.
I have a question just to start things off, and then Brandon, Carson, please jump in on this. But Keith, it sounds like you pretty much focus on sales leadership and helping people transition into sales leadership, sales coaching. Why do you find people wanting to get into this job, especially if you've been a high performing, individual contributor making lots of money? Why do they want to get in this job, and where do you see the biggest, areas of downfall and challenge?
Sure. I guess I could start with a very quick story. I was working with a manager who was sharing with me, he had a rep probably about 6 months. And the rep came to him 6 months later and said, "Hey, listen, when do I get promoted? I want to become a manager." And rather than this manager get on their soapbox and try to explain why they can't be a manager yet, and maybe there's not an open position, or maybe there's not a fit yet, this manager said, "You know what? I want you to shadow me just for one day. Just shadow me for one day. See what I do, see the meetings I go into, who I'm talking to, the back end reports and stuff that I'm responsible for." At the end of that day, the salesperson looked at their manager and said, "I never want your job." I think there's a certain assumption, this allure, the seduction of management, that people make assumptions that it's a greater position of power and authority. You're going to make more money. Well, we know that's not always true. You're going to have more autonomy. And we know that's not true as well. So I find a lot of salespeople becoming managers because a manager or someone else in the organization approaches a top producer and they say, "Hey, listen, there's a management opening. Do you want to become a manager?" And the salesperson looks around and says, "Sure. No training, but you're going to become a manager." And just like that, they become a manager. And because of the lack of training around coaching, which we'll get into, all they become is a super salesperson doing their salespeople's job for them.
So is there
Sounds awful.
Yeah, it sounds awful. Yeah.
Sounds awful.
Well, that's what I say. I tell managers all the time, guys, you have the same job as I do. You have a practice. I have a practice. Your practice is your team. My practice are my clients. My responsibility is to make every one of my clients more valuable every day. Your job as a leader is to make your people more valuable every day. I think I have the greatest job in the world. I wake up excited about what I get to do and make an impact. And I tell managers, if you're not feeling that, then you're not coaching. The good news is you can get to that point once you transform your thinking around what it means to be a leader and coach and how you engage with your team.
Keith, I have a question, and maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but it seems to me that there's personality profiles that are better suited for sales management than others. And with the tendency to be who's selling the best, and now that there's an opening, let's go put them into the management role. Why don't more companies have a more like systematic way of discovering who the right leader should be and then getting them in place and training them? I mean, there's such a need for high quality salespeople. We're constantly talking about pipeline and more revenue and faster, accelerated pipelines and all those things. And yet it just seems like the manager gets thrown in as such an afterthought.
Mm-hmm. And typically that afterthought is coming from a place of reactivity. They're reacting to something, whether someone left and they have an open position or whatever the case is. Then that manager's in there. They become the manager. They're not trained how to manage. And as you were alluding to, is now you have a manager in a position. Maybe they're not a fit. Okay. I look at it that to be a great leader, you have to have the right mindset. You need the right skill set. You need the right communication, because the way I define sales, leadership, and coaching is that it is a language. And the language of leadership and sales is coaching. So it's about being an effective communicator. At the end of the day, what I find is that the greatest managers today are truly practicing what the core principle of sales and leadership is today, which is care. And if you're coming from a place of care, by default, you're going to show up differently. And if managers and salespeople are still selling and managing they were pre-pandemic, they're already set up for failure. 74% of managers still have not been trained how to coach, let alone how to train or manage remotely. So no wonder why 95% of people are thinking about leaving their job in the next 6 months.
Yeah, I think so often, and this is such an important topic, because so often I think managers are almost just thrown out to the wolves. They're just expected to be able to manage day one, to coach day one. We have a framework that we utilize in our leadership called model, coach, care. So modeling the behavior that you expect, being able and willing to roll up your sleeves, jump in with your team, but you're the hero maker, not the hero. And I think that's where a lot of top sellers who move into the sales realm struggle, into the leadership realm struggle, because they're not ready to like take off the superhero outfit and the cape, and they want to still be the one making it happen. Keith, what I'd love to hear, especially given how much work you've done with great leaders, is this an acumen that can be trained effectively? And what are some of the activities that you typically see in the top of the top when it comes to sales leaders?
Yeah, sure. And I want to also build off what Brandon was saying is in terms of personality profiles and recognizing what makes a great leader, other than the mindset of really putting others first, is what I've seen to avoid the problem, Brendan, that you were alluding to, is companies that have a good handle on developing their managers will have, for example, a high potential program for their top sellers, right? And I know you guys are familiar with that. So they'll take their sellers that want to be a leader or want to be a manager and start developing them, putting them in management training courses. So they have that opportunity to really get their feet wet without being thrown to the wolves and are immediately responsible for, P&L and revenue numbers. That works well. Unfortunately, I would say 95% of companies don't do that. And when they're thrown to the wolves, that salesperson was a top seller and now they're a manager, they know how to sell. So let's play this out. I'm a manager now. You guys are my direct reports. You have a challenge or a question, you come to me. Well, I don't know how to coach. I don't know how to lead a conversation with questions, but I do know how to sell. And I'm thinking in a nanosecond, I've been in that person's position before. So what do I say? Hey, listen, you know what? When I was in your role, this is how I handled it. So you should do this too. And now that rep goes out and executes on it. And the challenge is you can't scale dependency. You can't scale dependency. You can't have a line of people out your proverbial door waiting for you to solve their problems, because now you're just being the quintessential chief problem solver. And you're actually adopting and taking ownership of everyone's problems once you try to solve them, which leads to two things. You're robbing people of the very accountability we want to instill, and we're certainly not making them independent, critical thinkers. The other part, and this badge of honor that managers often feel they need to wear to show that they're the best and they have all this knowledge, actually backfires on them. Because what they don't realize in that moment when they're giving answers is that some people are thinking, well, gee, thanks, Mr. or Mrs. Manager, for asking for my opinion first. I thought you'd want to hear that. I guess that's not important to you. And the fact that you're giving me the solution, I guess you don't trust me. I guess you don't have trust in my ability. What do you think that's going to do to the number one thing that every salesperson needs to sell? Confidence. What do you think that's going to do to their confidence? It's going to kill it. And the manager doesn't even realize it. So.
Hey, I want to hit a comment here from Bob, but I want to tie it in, Keith, what you were just saying with a question as well. So Bob is saying if managers insert themselves into all the deals, become the super seller, right? They tend to tear the team apart, or they teach the team to be autonomous and become a choke point and break on sales acceleration. What I've heard you say is two things. One there, right? One thing to don't do is don't try and go be in and just push people out of the way and be get involved in the deals. The second is don't become the problem solver. Do both of those situations actually end up becoming that choke point and slow down the whole sales organization?
The quintessential bottleneck boss.
Bottleneck.
That is exactly what slows down. We hire people to do a certain job. We hope we're making a good hire. Why then do managers feel they need to do their people's job? You might as well fire them and just take on their quota. So it's this unfortunately almost innate conditioning that every salesperson and manager has, which is they're result driven. Ask any leader or salesperson, are you result driven? Absolutely. I want to drive to get those results. Every organization is result driven because we all have targets on our back. We have numbers to hit. We have quota to hit. Here comes the challenge. If I'm always focused on what's next as a salesperson or a manager, I'm not focusing on what's now. And if I'm not focusing on what's now, I'm not focusing on the development and coaching of my people, which is what they need today, not when, the fire, is burning and that manager needs to jump in, because at that point, they already missed the coaching opportunity. And then they get to be the super salesperson to save that deal.
It seems to me that we could probably spend our entire show today talking about all the things that most companies do and tend to do wrong. How do companies, if they're in the middle of something doing it wrong, how do they get themselves out of it? Because for me, I do keep going back to, like, I hire people in my company based on personality profiles, that I believe fit the role that's taking place. Like somebody who has a high empathy, is other oriented, tends to be more of the coach, the trainer personality. Well, that should be the sales leader. They may not be a great salesperson themselves, and that's okay, because that's not their job. Their job is to help equip other people to go do it. But it sounds like that mindset is just not part of the process generally. So how does a company do this better? Let's talk about tactically, how do we make change and do this better? Because I do think we could probably sit here and I'll tell 20 different stories about all the things that people do wrong. And I started watching Ted Lasso again.
My
And
wife
it, and
just
it,
finished it. Yes, she
and
had
it,
never
it,
seen it. Loved it.
Oh gosh, and I love it. But here was that other learning moment. They took Jamie, who was a quintessential center forward. He was the goal scorer. He was the ball hog. He was the jerk. And then in the second season, one of the coaches goes, "You've ruined him as a player." And they said, "Why?" And he said, "You made him into a team player. His strength, his superpower was that he was a ball hog." As they said, they called him an a-hole. And they said they got to get him back to being that a-hole so that he can go be a goal scorer. And I think that's what I keep thinking of as we're talking about this, is we take somebody who's a great producer, we put him in the role as a manager, and then they just kill the culture of the team because they want to demand everybody go do it the way I do it or I did it. And that's not conducive to their personalities or their skill set.
It's amplified in sales organizations, right? Where you have more of those ball hogs, I guess, if you will, maybe in sales than you may have in other parts of the business.
Well, look at the great A player athletes that you try to put into the owner's box or you try to put into the coach role versus some of the greater coaches that might not have had an illustrious career, but because they're able to bring people together, they understand the importance of morale. They can keep a steady hand on the wheel. These are the things that really set the tone for sales leadership.
Yeah. All right, Keith,
So
tell us what to do.
Yeah, I had a question in there, but it turned into
I got it. It was what can we do tactically to start changing a culture? Now, when you're dealing with large organizations, changing a culture feels like you're turning a battleship. It can be very overwhelming. And what I share with managers is saying, wait a second, rather than stressing out and feeling overwhelmed about changing a culture, what if you create a subculture? And they say, well, what's a subculture? I say, well, it's a culture that exists in a culture. And the subculture is your team and the atmosphere that you create. And they're speaking to you every day and they're interacting with you every day. Well, guess what? You're the culture. And that's the good news for managers because they have the power to make an impact. When it comes to creating the accountability of change, I have an enrollment process, a strategy which I call creating an accountability partner. And basically what it sounds like is going to that person or that peer or that rep and saying, hey, listen, what I want for you is to be successful and hit your goals. And I know it's important that we work together in a consistent, collaborative way. I also know that we are both focused on the core values in the organization and always trying to excel and do a better job. So here's what I'm proposing. How about every single time we see each other slipping back into maybe old habits or some toxic habits, we have the permission to call each other out, to let each other know in the moment when that's happening so we can make an adjustment right there immediately. Are you open to doing that? You just created a mutual level of accountability without the fear. So now I have permission and people understand intent. So if I say, hey, you're not honoring that, core value, they're not going to get upset. They're not going to be in fear. They understand intention. And one of the reasons why there is so much fear and uncertainty today in organizations is because managers are really good at saying what's going on. And there's so much change on a daily basis in organizations with technology and AI and trying to adapt all this stuff into new processes. And, with managers, they try to look for these other pieces that are going to help complete the puzzle to help build their team. But the real piece that's missing is their own development and having to be that coach. So developing an accountability partnership sets proper intent. And the challenge, as I was alluding to before, is that when intentions aren't clear, people default to fear. So again, managers are really good at saying, hey, this is what we're doing, but they fail at here's why we're doing it. And most importantly, here's what's in it for you. So imagine if managers took the time to actually have a conversation with each person on their team and not assume what they're motivated by, because all salespeople are not coin operated, but truly uncover what their core values and motivators are. Well, then you could hold them accountable for creating those things, and for living those things, because that's what they want. And when you can align people's values and priorities with the core business objectives, and they're thinking, well, if I achieve my business objectives, I get this personally. Now you have alignment. Now you have a shared goal. Now you have that North Star that person knows why they're doing things and what's in it for them. That's going to create empowerment, not fear.
Great leadership is such a critical element. And Keith, you touched on this earlier, because a lot of us will stay or leave or invest in a company because of the people that we work for. Or leave because of the person that we may work for. I myself actually followed a great leader for across 3 roles in 6 years because I really wanted to work for this person. She leveled me up. And I think that's why it's so critical that as sales leaders, we're always leveling people up. Now, my question to you is this. I've benefited by having been a top performer as an IC, but going into an account leadership role, and I had immediate credibility. I'd had success at that level. But I also agree with you. Your job is not to come in and just tell people how to do the job the way you would do it. They got hired for a reason. Their unique role is to figure out how to do with their unique skills and superpowers, how to be successful. Now, can I help them see around corners better? Can I help guide them? Can I support them? Can I evangelize them? Help them on their career path? Absolutely, yes. But we talk a lot on this show about how much has changed in sales. The more things change, the more things they stay the same. We've obviously got a lot of new technology. We've got AI, we've got automation, we've got new ways to meet our customers. But on the flip side, the fundamentals of sales are still the same. How can we as sales leaders still keep our act sharp, knowing how to effectively coach our team when everything around us, including the tooling, the reporting, and the ways we touch our customers, is changing?
There are unbelievably so many distractions. I couldn't agree more. And these distractions, I think, to your point, are actually taking us away from the core essential competencies and skills of a salesperson. Even if you look at AI, right? And AI is only as good as the information that it has, right? It's only as good as the information that's being inputted. Therefore, AI cannot do something. It cannot be creative. Correct me if I'm wrong. It cannot create something from nothing. It creates it from the data, but it can't be creative as 2 human beings having a conversation and saying, wait a second, if we do it this way, we might get a better result. My point is that there are new conversations that salespeople need to master. And the new acumen that they need to develop is becoming a coach as well. It's not just the manager who has to be the coach for their peers or for their employees. It's your salespeople and ICs need to be a coach for their customers. Because as I mentioned before, the new sales methodology is care. How do you demonstrate care in a conversation? You're not going to do that by automating your sales process, because the one thing you can't automate are relationships. So to me, it's when I'm coaching managers and salespeople, I'm not coaching them on technology. I'm coaching them on how to foster deeper connections with people and what are the conversations that sound like. For example, if a manager is having a conversation with a direct, and right now, here we are trying to build relationships on a screen. Some people make the assumption it's more difficult to build a relationship on a screen. I personally believe that's not the case. Of course, there's no substitute for face-to-face. However, it's the conversations that help engage and fortify relationships. So when was the last time you were sitting down with your manager and your manager said, you know, I know we're always talking about business and hitting our numbers. How are you doing? You know, how have you adjusted to this change in our hybrid world? What's working well for you? Because I'd like to know, maybe there are things that you're doing that I could be doing. What's your self-care regimen? Because self-care is non-negotiable. How do you turn off work at the end of the day so you can be present with yourself and your family? How do you set boundaries if you're working at home so that you can honor your personal priorities and your business priorities? No one's having this conversation. Why? Because no one's ever had a need for it. So it's one of those quadrants where we didn't even know it. And now that I'm putting it in front of a line of vision for these leaders and they're having these conversations, they're increasing engagement. They're retaining their best people. The statistic of the exodus of people leaving has been reduced. The level of employee engagement today, or disengagement, I should say, is, I think it's horrific. It's 87 to 90% now. So these are things that could help reignite the relationships that not the salespeople desperately need with their customers, but the relationships that peers have and the relationships that managers have with their team.
Man, Keith, I love it. You know what's so cool about this is that we were going to have this conversation around sales leadership, and it ended up becoming this conversation about caring about people, and therefore we become better leaders, we become better companies, and people do better in their jobs by helping them know better who they are. You talked earlier about aligning their personal values with their job and the company values. Like, that's how we get the best out of people. And it seems for me, I mean, as a founder and owner of a company, these are the things that I care about, right? I want to empower my team. I mean, one of the things, and I know I get told I'm a little Pollyanna, but everybody that comes to my company, the first time I meet with them on their first day, or as soon as I can meet with them, it's like, hey, my goal for you is that when you leave our company, you are better than you are today. And I want to partner with you to be better. Now, why do I do that? Part of it's selfish, to be honest. And part of it is it's genuinely who I am. But I know the selfish part of me is when I actually care about people, they work harder, they work smarter, they care more, they stay longer, and then they recruit their best friends and relatives to come in and fill positions as well. And it doesn't matter if that's in a sales role or any other role of a company. So, man, just, big old massive fist bump to bringing care about people into a sales conversation.
Thank you. Awesome. Appreciate that, friend.
Yeah, the two biggest themes that really have jumped out at me during this conversation that I love were care, and then you can't scale dependency. And Keith, what I'd love to get your thoughts on is, I can tell you, having been a manager at a very young age, I probably made just about every mistake you can make as a manager because I didn't have a lot of training. I think sometimes we throw our managers out to the wolves. You promote a top seller. I was that guy. I tried to befriend my team. I tried to be their feel-good go-to person. And I jumped in, did their job with them and for them. And, it just wasn't always the right move. And what sometimes that sets up is that you don't have that ability, that conducive environment to have that mutual accountability. And I think back in my career, what has been the best interactions that I've had with managers that I really respect? And sometimes it's that almost constructive feedback, painful, in the moment back where I'm really agree with that. I'm right. Sales leaders have a challenge often in giving that constructive feedback, having tough conversations for the betterment of their personnel and of their team. How should sales leaders how they can do a better job feedback, not putting stuff jumping right in for the betterment of their employees.
Yeah, thanks. I actually would go back to Brandon's point. I love when you're hiring people and what you do initially. What you say, I use a different word. I just call it enrollment. You set positive intent. You said, listen, what I want for you is for you, when you're ready to leave this company, more valuable than when you started here. Versus you got to hit your quota. You got to hit your numbers. Here's your scorecard. Here are your commitments. If I had a leader say what you shared, I would be fully engaged immediately. The byproduct is I'm going to hit my number. Okay? People aren't motivated. Hey, do you hit your number? Do you hit your number? Do you hit your number? Are you hitting your goals? How many meetings do you have? What's going to close this quarter? What about the other conversations that are happening? What about the process? Hey, walk me through these conversations. How is it going? When you were having that conversation with a client and you said it was difficult, how did you turn it around? What questions did you ask them? Managers are missing the opportunity to coach the process, and the challenge is because we're so result driven, don't coach the result. You coach the process. And to your point about, because I'm getting back to your point about enrolling and difficult conversations, if you're starting by setting positive intent and letting people know what you're doing, it removes the fear. It's sort of like if I was a manager and I sent an email to one of my ICs, and in the email, in the subject line, it said, in all caps, please call me ASAP. What are you thinking? Okay, definitely nothing positive. Not, hey, my manager wants to tell me how amazing I am. You're thinking, what did I do wrong? Did I just lose a deal? Am I going to be put on the infamous PIP? And then I call you and I just want to say, hey, listen, I just wanted to take a moment and acknowledge you for closing out the quarter strong. You started slow. I really admired your commitment to turn it around and exceed your goal. So just want to applaud your efforts. Really, really appreciate that. You did not see that coming. No one does, because we need to set intent even around what motivates people, uncovering their motivation, giving constructive feedback. Why are managers reluctant to give feedback, and why do people hate feedback? Well, personally, for me, which amazes me, and I won't go on a rant on this, why companies want to create a feedback culture. Why would you want to create a feedback culture? People don't even understand what that means. So you're just going to create a feedback culture, what? Run around and say, hey, this is what you're doing. This is what you're doing wrong. This is what you're doing wrong. Hey, I'm just giving you feedback. Nobody wants feedback. You know what people want? They like ideas. They like collaboration. They're like, hey, let's talk about creating something better. Okay. Hey, here's what I noticed that if we can work on together would make you even more successful. Those are the conversations that they're open to having. That reduces the fear because you're setting the positive intent. If I could, it's sort of like what I was sharing before. To me, if I get permission from a rep or anyone to give feedback on the spot, they know my intent. Okay, so it's not like, hey, can I give you some feedback? People, oh, no, I don't want any feedback. Or my favorite, constructive criticism, which is an oxymoron. They already know your intent. So think about how much easier a manager's job is when you can go to your people and virtually share anything, because behind that, they know you are there unconditionally committed to them.
Love that.
And when you do that, and when you set that parameter and foundation, you can build on that, and you'll never ever worry about having cracks in that, or losing trust, or not understanding your manager's intent and going to fear.
You know, Keith, I think I'm hearing you saying even something more than coaching the process, right? I think I'm hearing you say, coach the development of the individual, which goes beyond the process, right? The process is a piece of that, and actually stay away from, or maybe certainly not emphasize, coaching the outcome, right? What you said there. And if you coach the development of the person, and their development over time as a contributor and whatever they're doing, the outcome will come. And again, the process is a piece of that. But I wanted to hit Melody's question here related to that is, and she's asking, what happens if they make a drop, right? Or if they screw up, what's the best way to assist them? And is there a point, and where, and maybe this is kind of a second part of the question is, if you're finding that somebody's just probably not a good fit, right? When do you know that, and what do you do? So I think there's two parts there. Like, what if someone just makes a mistake, they need some help? But then I think, they're always going to get people that are just not coachable into the org to develop them in the organization we're looking for. Okay, I know that was a lot there.
No, I actually got 3 questions in there, so let's take them. Number 1, fire is burning, manager has to jump in. That means one thing: they weren't honoring the ABCs of leadership. Always be coaching, because if they were coaching all the time, that's when they recognize challenges when they're this big before they become this big, which no one can miss. If you're coaching all the time, you'll have that opportunity. That's number 1. If at the point the fire is burning, forget about it. Coaching gets thrown out the window. You already missed the moment. At that point, you would do a postmortem. So at that point, you could sit down and say, hey, listen, we got through this issue. We got to the other side. Let's sit down and talk about what you and I need to do to put together a strategy or a process so we can avoid this from happening again. Postmortem. Okay. The other thing about dealing with an underperformer or not a fit, there's a strategy I have called the 30-day success acceleration program, or said a different way, a 30-day turnaround strategy. I write about this in my book. And basically, in 30 days, a manager can assess, but more importantly, that individual can assess whether or not that position is a fit for them. And I will just very quickly give a 1,000-foot overview of how this works. Is if a manager can sit down with, quote unquote, and a performer, someone who doesn't know if they belong there, and they sit and they say, hey, listen, let's work on a plan to get you where you want to be and turn around your performance. And in 30 days, you know what? You'll assess whether or not you feel this is a fit for you. And every week that manager provides unconditional support, not conditional support, unconditional support for that person. And for 4 weeks, that person, every meeting you have with that underperformer or person who may not be a fit, they are making commitments that they will honor for the following meeting. If they're not honoring their commitments, at the end of 4 weeks, you didn't fire them. They fired themselves. They self-selected out. And that's the point. I've never met a manager who likes to fire people, because at the end of the day, managers truly do have a good place. They're coming from a good place. It doesn't mean they know how to express that. But if we look at a situation like this, rather than be the manager that throws people under the bus, puts that underperformer, throws them to HR and put them on a compliance plan, which, by the way, is your legacy, how do you want to be known? Do you want to be known as that kind of manager, or the manager I'm referring to that provides unconditional support, where at the end of 4 weeks, that person every week had an opportunity to honor their commitments or not? They chose. This is why managers never have to fire anyone again. People will either opt in or opt out, and you get to look like the hero because your team still talks. So now go back to the legacy question. How do you want to be known? Do you want to be known as the person that throws the people under the bus? Or do you want to be known as the leader that demonstrates unconditional support? And that's the legacy you're leaving. So I always like to ask, if you ran into one of people you managed, 10 years from now, what would you want them to say about you? Or if you ran into yourself 10 years from now, what would you want to see? What type of brand and legacy would you have wanted to create? So that's the 30-day. The other point I want to make in terms of mistakes, I want to give the audience a tactical strategy that they can use right now to start coaching immediately. I used to call it the 60-second coaching strategy. I actually timed it. It's 30 seconds. And I'm from New York and I talk fast. So I will share this with you guys. Here's the strategy that every single person here coaches, salespeople can use to coach in 30 seconds. Someone comes to you, let's say manager, we have the IC goes to their manager looking for help. The manager at that point is at a crossroad. They can either go one way and take that path to be the chief problem solver, do their people's job for them, or they could take this path and lead the conversation with a question rather than an answer. That's what great leaders do. So my response would be, hey, Carson, I'd love to help you with that, and I'm happy to share my opinion with you. However, you're a lot closer to this situation, and I trust you, and I trust your judgment. So what's your opinion on how to resolve this or achieve the results you want? Under 30 seconds.
Wow.
One question. Let's break it down. You're acknowledging that you will be giving them your opinion, just not immediately. Please, if there's one thing leaders walk away with today is this: seek to understand people's point of view before you share yours, okay? You know what you know. You don't know what they know. Seek to understand their opinion and point of view. You will always have an opportunity to share yours later. So I acknowledge the fact that I'm going to share my opinion. Then I say, hey, you're a lot closer to this than I am, and I trust you and I trust your judgment. Well, what's that going to do? First of all, they are a lot closer to the situation. And by sharing that you trust them, it builds connection and it helps their confidence. And then by saying, what's your opinion on how to achieve this? I'm not saying give me a solution. I'm not saying give me a strategy. I'm not saying give me an answer, because those can be right or wrong. An opinion is never right or wrong. It just is. Now, let's say this person shares with you this opinion. Now, a lot of managers are saying, well, Keith, if they give me their ideas and it works, well, that's great. But what happens if it doesn't? Well, at that point, there are three buckets. Number one, they share their opinion with you. It sounds great, maybe even better than the ideas you were going to share, Mr. or Mrs. Manager. I know that's hard to believe. You tell them to run with it. Second scenario, have some good ideas not fully baked out. Third scenario, you know for a fact that what they're thinking in terms of how they're going to engage with that customer will not work. Well, you can either take the road of saying, how long have you been in this job? That's certainly going to create trust in a warm environment. Or you could respond with this: thanks for sharing your ideas. I appreciate that. Let's walk through them together so that we can create a process and solution that's going to help you get to the results you want. Now it becomes a collaboration, not an interrogation. Now it becomes a conversation, not you being the directive manager and telling them what to do. And every leader can start doing that today.
There's so many great principles that are coming out of this today, Keith. And I think, for our sales leaders in the audience today, I think one of the key takeaways, often we put the pressure on ourselves to feel like we've got to be the smartest people in the room. And that's far from the truth. Often what we're trying to do is orchestrate these ideas, bring them together. If I can replicate the best practice that someone over here on my team is doing with someone over here, it's not going to take food off the table for the other person. Having that collaborative spirit is ultimately going to elevate everyone. I always love the quote, "The rising tide raises all ships." And what you were sharing earlier too about the unconditional support that we can provide our team. It reminds me of this team that I was leading almost 20 years ago. And I was competing against this guy that was promoted at the exact same time as me. And they could never catch us. And the reason why is because his philosophy was, I'm just going to fire all my bottom performers all the time. And we focused on coaching everybody to at least their optimum or maximum performance. And to your point, sometimes you figure out, like, this is a fit, this isn't a fit. People made their own decisions. Yes, there were people that moved out of the business. But having that feeling, that foundation of unconditional support, that communication, that transparency, that made all the difference in the world. And I wanted to ask, given our audience today of sellers and sales leaders, often I find it isn't a complete overhaul of our process that is required to increase results, to improve performance. Often it's small tweaks that really make all the difference in the world. I had a great leader who taught me the importance of, instead of just on a one-on-one, jumping right into the business, start with some personal dialogue. Get to know these people on a personal level. Those types of things can go a long way. What's some advice that you would give some sales leaders today about maybe small tweaks that they could make in their process today that would have immediate and significant impact?
In terms of how they're leading their team?
Yes.
Got it. Well, the first thing is enrolling your people in coaching so they understand that this is a journey you're both going on together. So they know that when their manager's struggling a little bit with coaching questions, they're going to be a little more forgiving because there's that alignment. The other thing is creating that level of accountability, which I think is something that all leaders struggle with because they think to themselves, well, I don't want to, them to feel like I'm micromanaging them, but I don't want to give them too much rope to, hang themselves either. So how can you hold people accountable? This is another great strategy, coaching strategy to uncover people's accountability. Stop banging your head, Mr. and Mrs. Manager, trying to come up with all the answers, how to motivate people, how to inspire them, how to hold them accountable, how to create an incentive. If you're asking yourself those questions, you're asking the wrong person. Ask them, because you're just going to make assumptions, and those assumptions are always going to be wrong. So, looking at the accountability piece, two questions to uncover people's accountability and how they want to be held accountable. Number one, Mr. or Mrs. IC, how do you like to be held accountable? Or if you want to say it softer, how would you like me to be your accountability partner in a way that would feel supportive and not like I'm micromanaging you? Let them set the rules up for the game. Now it's their rules, you're just reinforcing them. Second question, Mr. or Mrs. IC, how would you like me to follow up with you if you don't honor the commitments you made? How would you like me to bring it up? Again, they're setting the rules, because some people say, like me, and many people are very direct. I know some of you guys are very direct. If you were my manager and I messed up, I want you to say, Keith, this is where you messed up, fix it, and go. You have till tomorrow to do it. I'll be like, I'm on it. You do that to some people, you will literally make them cry. I've heard managers say that. Say, but I don't understand. That's how I like to be managed. Well, there's another trap. Managers and salespeople don't manage and sell in your own image, because now you're making a costly assumption that what motivates you and how you like to be held accountable and managed is going to be the same as others. And that's never the case. And, building trust, and also up your another point that's showing up in my mind here is, as leaders, we want our people to succeed, but there's also a trap there. And we can be seduced by the potential we see in people. And the one thing that managers, and this is that our strengths are our weaknesses. We care so much, which is a strength, but you can't care more about the other person's life and job than they do. You can't want more for someone than they want for themselves. And you could think in your mind and have the internal narrative, but if they only worked harder, if they only, got more organized, they can make more money or achieve more. What if they don't want it? What if they're a really solid B player, a good corporate citizen, empowering, collaborative? You want to make them an A player? Oh, you just got to work, on the weekends and 12-hour days. But I value my family time and my weekends. You can push a solid performer right out the door. We all want A players, and there's no room at the winner's table for C players. But B players, we need them, and we can continue, to your point that I've heard from all of you, you can always still coach them up to achieve what they want, not what you want.
Wow. And I think that goes...
Answered everything, Coach, to your question?
It's beautiful.
I think it was great. And I think it goes back to Rhett putting Peter Drucker's quote on here of culture eats strategy for breakfast. what you're talking about is making sure that we have a culture that cares about people, to know, like, I was in a conversation with our kids, actually, and my wife says, our culture has gotten so focused on excellence and the best and all this stuff. She goes, it's okay to be average and happy. Like, if that's what you want, it's okay to be average and be happy. We don't talk enough about the happiness side, about the joy side. It's, when our 11-year-old was talking to our older daughter about, well, why didn't you look into going to Harvard for college? My older daughter goes, I had no interest in going to a school like Harvard. And, for our 11-year-old to understand that, and that's where it's like, hey, it was okay to be average and happy. And it's not for everybody, but in a lot of cultures, we don't even make that an option for people. And what I'm hearing you say is having a culture where we're so focused on other people and their values and their goals. And yeah, maybe the C- player should go to a different company. But it's okay to have some B players in there and know that you're going to get consistency out of them.
And what about, let's go beyond that. What about their great advocates, or their great motivators, or their great coaches? What if they're actually coaching the rest of their team and they have great relationships and they're able to bring people together? Well, that's certainly someone I want on their team who's hitting their number.
Right.
Keith, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
As we kind of wrap up here. So I'm a co-founder in a software company. We're growing pretty fast, and we're getting a lot of pressure from our board to hire a CRO, Chief Revenue Officer, and as a replacement or an alternative to even a sales leader. Right? They're saying you don't need a sales leader, you just need a CRO. I've been pushing back because I think I see the role of the CRO, but I don't see it as a replacement for a sales leader. What is your take on this? And do you run into this where there's confusion between what a CRO does and a sales leader and their responsibility? I think this is a very common thing that, especially in tech companies, that people run into.
To me, it's when I hear this, there are a lot of assumptions going on. So, for example, does the board assume that a CRO knows how to sell and can build a sales organization? What assumptions are they making about their role compared to a chief sales officer or a VP of sales? Do they know what a VP of sales does? Do they know what their role is?
No.
So to me, I always look at this again as a great coaching moment for you, is to seek to understand, where are they really coming from? It's important, and this is actually another great tool to share with your audience here, is to leverage what I call springboard questions. Probably one of the most powerful coaching questions that you can use. And a springboard question might sound like this. We don't feel we need a VP of sales because the CRO is going to be handle their responsibilities. Now, we can go two paths. We can get defensive and get on our soapbox and we're going to lose. Or we could say, well, wait a second. When you say we don't need a VP of sales, can you help me understand more about that? And when you say the CRO is going to handle it, how do you mean? Or if they say, you know what, it's just going to be more stressful or more difficult. Well, when you say stressful and difficult, can you say more about that? Or a customer says, listen, I expect exemplary service. Well, salesperson can say, oh, of course we give great service. But they have no idea what exemplary service means through that person's eyes. Just like we don't know what happy, stressed, overwhelmed, successful, good salesperson looks like through other people's eyes. We have our opinion and point of view, but so do others. So we cannot assume that the words people use hold the same definition that we have. And that's why two of the most important words in sales and in coaching are be curious.
I was going to say that. Yeah, it sounds like be curious.
Because, and I even take it to the level of be insatiably curious. Try to say that 10 times fast. If you're insatiably curious by default, you're going to ask more and better questions. So it's really, and again, it really does tie into the mindset here of being present. Because if you're not present, you can't listen. Active listening happens in the moment. If you're not present, you can create new possibilities. Creation of new possibilities happens in the moment. So it might sound paradoxical, but when we have something that we want or we're looking to support people, the greatest leaders, salespeople, coaches actually detach from the outcome. They actually let go of their agenda when having a conversation. So, Tom, for your example, to me, I would just be really, really curious to understand really their point of view. Forget about my point of view. Forget about my agenda. I'm going to park that. Okay. I'm not pushing my agenda. I want to know what theirs is. So then I can align their agenda with what I can see and create that possibility where now, you know what? I didn't realize that's what a sales leader does. Now I get it.
Well, what I hear you say is it creates conversation. It takes the opinion that just somebody may have an opinion, whether it's based on reality or fact or even best practices, just could be an opinion because they heard it on a podcast, right? That you need a chief revenue officer. So I think what you do is you create conversation and you dig through it and you end up in a better place regardless of the whole thing. But I just wanted to touch, go ahead. Sorry, Craig.
I was just, this is a great, we could probably talk about this one all day. I think it would be interesting to see what that job description looks like.
Well, that's what I was going to say. In their mind, right, a chief revenue officer generally is dealing with analytics, technology. They're looking at the numbers. They're doing a lot of things, which is very, very different than what we've talked about today. Very different role, very different mindset, very different type of person. So it's, anyway.
No, you're not managing revenue if you're not developing your salespeople because you're going to have no revenue coming in.
That's right. That's right. You may have the best spreadsheets in the world, but it's not going to
beautiful spreadsheets.
That's right.
Beautiful.
That's right.
Gosh, now it sounds like the private equity group that bought my company and turned me into a spreadsheet jockey.
I want to ask Keith before we wrap, what's your favorite song to play on guitar?
Oh my gosh. Well, luckily we're ending it because otherwise this would have been a whole conversation on music coaching. I saw Dave Matthews last night. So fantastic show outside. And favorite song to play on guitar, I could say what bands, music I like. I would play a lot of Rolling Stones, Fish, Grateful Dead, Dave Matthews, Eric Clapton, lot of the 90s grunge. But pretty much the whole spectrum to Jim Croce and James Taylor. So, it's, what, next time we'll do a whole session on just, what, I take requests, I'll play whatever you want.
I love that idea.
Hey, and this kind of ties into Jason's question here as we wrap up. He says he would like to think more about all of this and what are you guys reading now that speaking to you on ideas, cares, coaching, and curiosity. I know you mentioned you had a book or two, Keith. Is this the type of thing you're covering in the book and going through?
Yeah. Yeah. So my first book, Coaching Salespeople into Sales Champions, has, people tell me it's their Bible for sales leadership and coaching. My last book was Sales Leadership, literally titled Sales Leadership. And that actually has more of an international approach to coaching because that I was coming from a place of having been to 75 countries and sharing stories and my experiences working with people in different countries and cultures to really share with people that coaching isn't a US thing or a UK thing. It's a global thing. At the end of the day, it's about connecting with people at a deeper level. And the only way you can do that is by coaching.
Brandon, I know we're out of time, but I'd love your take on this quickly. With what you're doing with Fist Bump and really helping people build relationships and rise above the noise. I'm wondering if a lot of what you're doing is really helping people coach each other and become coachable, coach, and use that to build the relationships that you go through.
Yeah, we've actually been talking a lot about that, and Carl Liba and I have had several conversations since he was a guest on our show a few weeks ago about, and it was part of the prompting for me to start watching Ted Lasso again about being curious. Remember, Carl, his whole thing is about curiosity.
Yeah.
We talked a lot about curiosity today. Um, helping people become curious about themselves. My book that I wrote, and it was an awful title. It didn't build intrigue, but it was 99 Powerful Questions. And the whole concept was about asking the right questions, being curious. And the first chapter is asking questions of yourself. And a big part of personal branding is getting to know yourself and know who you are and who you want to be. And too often, just like in sales, just like with sales leaders, when C-suite or business owners are attempting to do anything around content and personal branding, they haven't done the work to really be curious. Who am I? How do I want to show up? What are my three main topics that I want to talk about? What part of my humanity do I want to bring into this? Right? We show up at networking events and we have conversations all the time, but do you ever stop and think, hey, which part of my person, my humanity, my personal life do I really want to show in these environments? We would just kind of intuitively go in conversations that are fine. We back out of conversations we don't want to get to. We don't want to go full open Komodo and tell everything. But then when it comes to your personal brand, we got to think about it. We got to be curious. We got to create a strategy that says, this is really who I am. And too often, what leaders come up with and what they start writing about or they create videos about, they haven't thought about it. It's not as authentic. It's not disingenuous, but it's not totally authentic. And it doesn't sit well. It doesn't get engagement. It doesn't get viewership. And then they end up quitting and they go, oh, LinkedIn doesn't work. It's like, if you don't do that inner work, like everything else in life, it always comes back to therapy, right? If you don't do that inner work, coaching or therapy or something, and you don't have that clarity, it lacks power and it lacks effectiveness.
Unfortunately, avalanches roll downhill. It starts from the top, and that's where the culture starts. It's interesting. I lost count how many leaders have shared with me. How do you coach the person who's not self-aware? Well, they struggle with that because it's not a go do. It's a go be. It's a mindset. So how do you coach mindset? That's probably the areas where leaders struggle the most because it's not tangible. So to me, that's an opportunity for that person. And even to myself, like, how am I showing up every day? What would people say about me? Even coaching someone, if you sent that email out to you, how would you respond to that? Or the way you just engage with that person, if they engage with you that way, how would you react? Or, what do you think people say about you? What do you think your brand is today? You very quickly uncover their level of self-awareness.
Keith, you've had some amazing insights today. A lot to think about. This is one I'm going to go back and listen to a couple times again.
Yeah, for
We've
sure.
had a few of those. Where can people find more about you? If they want to interested in your coaching, what should they go check out?
Sure, I appreciate that. And I have tons of resources on my website, keithrosen.com. We just relaunched it. I have a couple of new ebooks out there on coaching that you can download for free. Actually, at this point, we're just launched another division, if you will, where we're trying to do a lot more philanthropic work in my organization. And one of the tiny steps we're taking right now is we're offering companies that might be struggling an opportunity for me to do an event for them, just like this, no charge, so that at least they could get some infusion to help support their sales leaders and managers, because maybe they're struggling and maybe it's not something universally shared where, we all know we need this coaching. Maybe half the company doesn't feel they need it. So it provides managers or leaders an opportunity for me to get in front of them and provide some quick tips and strategies to support their teams. And that's, to me, that's my core value, which is to make an impact unconditionally. So I hope I'm doing that today. And if anyone's interested, they could always reach out to me. My email is keith@keithrosen.com. So hope to hear from you then.
You know, Brandon, we've had Christy Jones right on a couple times in the last month or so, and she talks a lot about superpower. I think it's pretty clear to see what Keith's superpower is here.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
I think it comes through. Carson, anything before we wrap up here?
Yeah, no, just the to Jason's question, actually what I'm reading right now, ironically or not, is First Break All the Rules by Marcus Buckingham and Kirk Kaufman. And really it's all about just what we've talked about today, rather than conformity and falling into the way that we think we need to act as managers or everybody else is doing, really doubling down on our strengths and superpowers as leaders and capturing the essence of our team. So it's a phenomenal session.
No, I really appreciate that. And it really speaks to vulnerability-based leadership. I actually believe in opening up the kimono. I believe in showing up fully transparent, because you show me a leader who embraces their vulnerabilities, who embraces their fears, I will show you a leader who is absolutely unstoppable. Because when you embrace that, what else can you stop?
Wow.
You're about getting a double fist bump from Brandon now. He's ready to read through with both fists. So
to me, it gives permission to people to be vulnerable. Yeah. But it starts with the leader. How you show up is how you want your people to show up. If you're coming to me and saying, "Oh, I don't understand why my team is so toxic and I'm losing people," my first question is, well, what role are you playing in all of this? Because at the end of the day, good news and bad news, every single challenge managers have in their organization is their fault. Okay? That's the bad news. Good news, every single challenge managers have in their organization is their fault. Because if it's in their power to do something about it, it's their choice. And it will always be in their power to make those positive changes that we've talked about today.
All right. I think that's a good place to wrap up.
We may have hit our longest episode yet.
Yeah.
No, we're still a few minutes short.
Yeah, we're a few minutes short.
We're going to have Keith close with a little Clapton, and that'll put us over the top.
That's right.
There you go.
Go ahead. We're ready. All right. Well, thanks again, Keith. Yeah, next time we will have a little bit of some music, I think.
Most definitely.
I'd love to hear what our audience would request from a music.
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
People like to jam out to,
Yeah, let's hear it. Who plays guitar? What favorite bands? Let's hear it in the chat. Write it out there.
That's right.
As we approach episode 100, we're trying to broaden out our scope of what we do and what we talk about. And musical guests, I think, would be great.
Well, we need to bring 3 or 4 of our past guests that were musically inclined, and we'll do a
Carl was really musical, jam. Right?
Well, actually, we could take it a step further, guys. I have a separate studio from my house. So full studio, all musicians. I have a jam session every week. Totally non-judgmental place, and everyone is invited. So
that's awesome.
Anyone, if you want to come by, just ping me and feel free to come by for a jam session.
That's awesome.
And by the way, let me end on this note, guys, and I'm sure we could probably say that several times, is to me, music is the universal language of the soul. I think coaching is the same. It's the universal language of the soul, because you don't coach from your head. The best coaches coach from their heart.
We can go another hour on that. We better wrap it up, Tom.
All right. Carson, wrap us up.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. All the great Q&A. Keith, amazing session. And